There we go. Good morning. It's 10:05 a.m. on August 15th. This is the Kentucky State Board of Elections, regular monthly meeting. I'm going to call this meeting to order and take attendance. I'm Secretary of State Michael Adams, Chair of the Board. I'm going to start with the members who are present in the room here in Frankfort, and then I'll call on the members that are attending virtually, starting with Member Johnson.
Hello, Jerry Johnson, a member of Franklin County.
James Lewis, retired county clerk, Fletcher County.
Good morning, member Pulaski County, Dwight Sears.
And then I'll call you in the order that I see you on the great big screen. Member Lane.
Good morning. I'm Lynn Lane, retired clerk from Ballard County, member.
Member Brown.
Hi, I'm Michael Brown, member Jefferson County.
Member Skolnick.
Good morning, Corey Skolnick, member Jefferson County.
Member Brangers.
Good morning, Deanna Brangers, member Jefferson County.
So we have a quorum this morning and we'll proceed to business. Thanks everyone for being here. So first item is to approve the draft minutes of our July 18th meeting. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Actually, I'm sorry. Are there any changes, any edits? Hearing none. I think we have the ayes. Any noes? All right, get warmed up this morning. The ayes have it. Number 3, review of 31 KR 4196E. So this is a draft regulation. I think all we're doing is just subbing in the form because we edited the form. Is that right?
That's all right. As Secretary pointed out last meeting, the legislature added a little tweak to the statute there that requires now the parking spaces be on the form. And there was no real good space to put that without creating a new field on the form. So we had that field on the form, and because we changed the form, we had to repromulgate, and we've got Jessica sitting over at the annex ready to file it as we speak. So that's the only change.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Member Lane. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Member Johnson. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Ayes have it. So next on our agenda is review and vote on county plans for the November election. We have 2 clerks with us today, as well as a member of a county board of elections. I'm going to give them the floor in just a moment. Let me start us with this. I am really pleased that we are way ahead of where we were at this time a year ago. When I say we, that is a collective we of everybody. We didn't get all the plans in until around Labor Day a year ago. And then we were in a game of chicken to get them reviewed and approved quickly. I want to thank first the clerks for getting us these plans early. Every single county got them in by the deadline, which has never ever happened before. So that made our job a lot easier. Ultimately, I think it's going to make your job easier too. I want to thank the staff for their review and also for posting these publicly, which led to our ability in my office to review them simultaneously, but also for the public to see them, which I think was a good step. So thank you all for doing that. So there is a legal process now that's a little different from what we had before, which is that the board gets the first review. Again, we've done this simultaneously, but the board gets the first vote. And then if I disagree, I can't veto a disapproval that you all make. If you all choose not to accept a plan, I don't have any ability to change that. But if you do approve a plan and I disagree, I can veto it. And then you can override my veto if you choose. Because we're right on schedule, I think we've got adequate time. If you all have issues with the plan and you want to send it back, you have time to do so. If you don't have issues with the plan, but then I do, there's still time for you to reverse me or time for the plan to be revised and updated and for us to approve it. So what I'd like to do is first invite the clerks up who took the trouble to drive in today to speak to you about their county plans. And then I think there's one of two ways y'all can proceed. If you disagree, tell me, but I think in principle, you can either approve everything and then I'll call you back in a week or two to override me if we veto something you disagree, or you can approve the plans you like and not approve the plans that you don't like. It's really your call on how you want to do this. So let me start with the clerk that had the longest drive today. We've got Gabe Summy and Scott Kimmick from the Kenton County Board of Elections. Would you all like to? I'll scoot over if you
I was
want to.
gonna see if they had any questions about my plan at this point, so.
So we have the Kenton County clerk here. We have their plan. I hope everyone's had a chance to see it. Any questions for Gabe?
I don't really have a question for Gabe, but I think it would be helpful. Gabe, if you would expand upon some of the, I know that you've added 4 locations, which I think is great. But I also think it would be helpful for you to expand upon some of the difficulties that you've had, because I know you're under a consent decree after the Department of Justice came in and they've been nitpicking in counties all across the country. It's hit us specifically in several of our counties. I think we probably have some more counties that are probably going to get hit by it. But I just think it would be helpful for the board, for the public to kind of understand some of the difficulties that you're having with some of the locations.
First of all, I know that when we expanded after the agreement, they had come and looked at the 24 locations that I had in the 2020 elections moving forward. At that point in time, they, out of the 24 locations that they came and visited, only 1 passed any ADA compliance. So the other 23, I had to create a remediation plan. And every time I've created a remediation plan, that goalpost keeps moving. And what I mean by that is I have an Excel spreadsheet that explains all the issues and how I'm going to fix them. That wasn't enough. They wanted me to come back and redo all my surveys, ADA surveys, and then they wanted pictures and everything. I know that you all experienced my 10 different emails with this plan. I don't think you all want to see that, but I will happily send an email so you can kind of see to the level of what is required, to the point where they want videos from when you get out of the car all the way into the facility, what's going to need to happen. Some of these changes are things that I cannot fix. I mean, my cities are called Crestview Hills and Park Hills and Villa Hills for a reason. And I can't remediate the slope of a parking lot. I can do whatever I can to get people closest to the door and create temporary spots. I have to ask these buildings to give me clearance to do that. I'm doing something on their property, not just putting up a cone with a van accessible sign. I'm caulking their concrete, which is a permanent fix, which they don't seem to mind, but that's a lot of time-consuming things for me. Then you also have the issue of I have to put down kind of temporary paint because nobody's ADA aisle next to the van accessible spot is now meets the criteria. I've shared this with everybody who either owns, leases, or has anything to do with that building. Several of them have been kind enough to make some modifications, but not all of them. It's an expensive fix. The school systems, which I use a lot, they're like, sorry, we're grandfathered in, which by the way, doesn't seem to be a fact, but they're not going to do that. So I feel I have more obligation, or the county board has more obligation to these locations than the people that physically own them. So that makes it really hard for me to find spots that would even meet this criteria. I have now had to convert one of my staff, actually 2 of my people who do nothing but go out and do an ADA survey to the point where the original surveys were very simple. Now, if I measure an aisle, I must put exactly what I measured. I had to go get all kinds of new digital equipment to do slope, to do the weight of the pool. And then they get to comment. So as I stated in my letter to you all, I'm at a push-pull here. I got the plan here by August the 9th. Regardless of what people feel like, the board did agree to what we had because it's what we had in 2023 primary, and then we added additional spots. In my prior year, I had 24. I added 10. And the reason I was able to add those 10 without the Department of Justice being able to do that is because in my agreement, it said if you had already had a location that was used and had an ADA survey, it could be used. And that's how I was able to bring 10 spots back fairly quickly. But now I'm required to redo all those surveys, and they have complete and utter control over what they will or will not approve. August the 9th, I get the plan to you. That's the deadline. The statute still says September 20th. That we have till the clerks basically have to get polling locations. We are complying to the nth degree with the Department of Justice consent decree. We are redoing all 38 of our surveys. We started with the new ones. They're already in their hands. They have not given me any timeline as to when they would or would not be approved. We're now going back through the additional 10 that I added to the roster. And then I have to, and then they still haven't approved any of my remediation plans for the 24 or the 23 that were considered non-compliant. And what that entails is I go back out, I say, okay, it doesn't have a proper aisle. So I'm going to use temporary paint to make it wider and put a temporary sign there. That's a lot. Unlike being the third largest county, I don't have an enormous election staff. My fiscal court has been incredibly lovely about this. I'm about to ask them tonight to also let me have some of their public works guys. Last year, they helped me get some of that done, but this is getting bigger and bigger. The more locations I add, the longer the week before I have to set up each physical location with all these remediations, and hopefully they'll get stolen. The other issue is that that's just the outside. We're not just talking about the outside, we're talking about the inside too. So most clerks don't say this or announce this fact that we actually pre-set up a lot of our physical locations because it would be very difficult for your poll workers to go get tables, go get chairs, put everything the way it needs to be to meet all this criteria for privacy and ADA compliance, and then also make sure all the machines are open in 1 hour. We ask them to be there at 5. There's just no way. So on the Monday before, I have a crew, 4 crews of 4 people that go to all these physical locations. And we set up as much as we can without, physically opening the machines. We put up the tables. We make sure that the ADA piece of equipment is where it needs to be. We make sure that everything's got electricity. We even use gaffer tape, you name it. We work very closely with all of our facilities. And I said, they've been really great, but that's a heavy lift. And it makes it very difficult, 1, to find any location that truly meets any of these ADA requirements. 2, to continually be able to be in contact with them to say, do you mind if I permanently change your facility? Temporarily change it with enough time. And then, it's just an ongoing process. So we have added 4 more. I have 70 precincts at 38 locations now. If you approve this plan, that does not mean that the Department of Justice will approve all of them. So I know I said 2 meeting minutes. So a lot of what's in my meeting minutes is if this, then that, right? Because I have to have a backup plan. And I can't call a special meeting every 5 minutes because that's just not how it works. Actually, I'm one of the only county clerks that has my county board vote on the plan. There is nothing in the statute that requires that. The statute requires you all to approve my plan in the new law, but I make sure that they're aware of what's going on. And if that's the case, and I need to know guidance on what needs to be there, but this is a plan we had in primary, did well, 34 locations, plus 5 additional locations for early voting. I think we have more than covered, taking care of the county. We've looked at population growth in our bigger cities, in our southern counties. We've had to replace locations because the Department of Justice was like, nope, that door can be propped open, but you can't even fit a wheelchair in it. So therefore, it is not going to ever pass. So we've had to move locations and find new ones. So not to belabor the point, if anybody has any questions about it, but I truly believe that we have covered everything we can, and we are kind of in this holding pattern, or I consider it kind of a tug of war about what will happen next and by what time. Because either way, I have to put on an election in November.
Anything you want to add?
No, Mr. Chairman, my purpose for being here this morning, I appreciate the board's indulgence. This is the first time I've attended a meeting of the state board in the 10 years that I've been on the county board. But we have worked diligently to ensure that people's have an opportunity to be a part of the process. Our meetings are open, they're public. We have 4 or 5 people who attend every meeting. I find it interesting that people complain that they're not included, they don't have input, when they're the very ones sitting at every meeting in silence. The plan has been reviewed by the board in total. It has been approved in total. We have voted to add the additional sites, knowing that it may create some delay with the Department of Justice, but it was as a result of a request by the city of Covington, the city of Erlanger, where there were choke points to eliminate any potential for choke points in this election. So we have listened, we have learned, and we have made adjustments. Our first, after the COVID, we went to 24, and we did have a choke point, a serious choke point at 4 precincts. There were not long lines countywide, 4 choke points. They were all in an area where there was a hotly contested House race. As you recall, 2 constitutional amendments that had to have legal sized paper to read them. And we had 5 judicial races, including Supreme Court and Court of Appeals, on the ballot at the same time. So we had a reason for people to be at the polls in a lengthy period of time, and yet we still got all returns back to the courthouse by 7 o'clock. And those people who wanted to vote, who were in line at 6, got to vote. So I would respectfully request the board to approve the plan today, contingent upon the secretary's review and contingent upon Department of Justice review, because regardless of what any of us say or do, they'll have the ultimate authority in determining what precincts we're allowed to use and which we're not. So that's my purpose for being here, and I appreciate your indulgence in the opportunity to speak.
And one last item, I just want to let you know, and it was in my letter because I wanted you all to know that there might be a contingent approval based on what the Department of Justice does. But Kenton County is a very unique way of letting people vote. Besides your early voting, we don't just say you can only go to this location. We assign people to that location if they want a pre-printed ballot. They literally on election day can go anywhere in those 38 locations and vote, because of the ability from the handicap accessible machine, the ADA compliant express vote. It has all of the ballot faces on there. And as long as they're willing to use that touch screen, they can vote anywhere they want. That's one, I think, a benefit in the ADA community is a huge flexibility for all voters, because if you've looked at my county, it's super long. I have a lot of people who are on their way to Cincinnati to work. They live out in the suburbs. They drop down to my office and vote before they go. That is, if I had to get rid of that flexibility, I think that would be a real shame, but it also is something that I think is unique because it allows a lot of people to have an opportunity. Plus, there's the 6 days of early voting in my office, and then you've got 3 days of early voting, which unlike other counties, we have 5 physical locations taking into account the geographic setup of our county. I think everybody's got lots of opportunities. We advertise, we're required to advertise. We advertise outside of what we're required to advertise. And I think that, you know, if people are having difficulties we are on the phones. Again, even at our last meeting, we agreed that we were going to continue to let people know that there's also that opportunity, especially for the ADA community, of mail-in ballots. You know, if they really feel like they can't get to the polls, then they need to know all of their options, and we do that. So I just wanted to state that that's a little different from everybody else.
Any questions or comments?
I have, I don't want to step in front of anybody, but please. First of all, thanks for coming. Scott and I have known each other for a long time, so you got a good member of your board along with the others, so. The DOJ stuff probably concerns me as much as anything. I'm sure it concerns you as much as anything. So can you help me understand a little bit about how we got here? So why do we have DOJ focusing so intently on Kenton County versus Harlan County, or versus, and I'm sure there's others that have been looked at, but is it, and there's a consent decree or order in place?
Yes, sir. An anonymous complaint was phoned into the Department of Justice that we were holding elections in areas that were not accessible to the disabled. That sparked, as they referred to it, a preliminary investigation, and then went to them coming back to us and advising that they wanted to enter into a consent decree on the advice of counsel. She thought, a county attorney thought it was best to enter into the consent decree rather than to try to litigate against the U.S. Department of Justice as to the sites that we're using for elections. So
How long has that been?
This was in
22.
right after the 22 election.
Well, they were there for the primary of 2022.
Okay.
Let me say, sir, they did, Jerry, they sent, in the 22 primary, they sent people into the county, both handicapped and non-handicapped, and went to the precincts themselves. They had people in wheelchairs, people on with walking
Secret
sticks.
shoppers.
Yes, sir. And reviewed all of our precincts and came back and basically, as the clerk said, you don't qualify on any of them. And we've got a brand new county building, less than 5 years old. We've got a box in front for people to drop their ballots in. It's clearly marked, beautiful box, well secured to the building, under camera. It's about a 1/16 of it. The slope from the parking lot to the box is about a 1/16 of an inch off under the ADA requirements. So we're having to work with the county to try to mediate, maybe cutting some of the concrete off of their new sidewalk to make that box accessible and be used for early vote for ballot drop.
I appreciate that. Let me ask another question, because it's a little unique for me, at least was. So instead of doing vote centers, you're allowing people to vote through the express vote. Why not just be all vote centers?
It is a vote. That's
We
what
do
allows
have
it to
vote
be a
centers.
vote center.
But do you advertise it as such?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So what I do is, if I could go completely paperless, like places like Madison and everything, people really like that. So for my vote centers, my true vote centers for early voting, I don't have pre-printed ballots there. I have the express vote machine, and I have a print on demand ballot system that provides the bigger piece, right? Because then anybody can go anywhere. And basically on election day, say, if you really need that pre-printed piece of paper, you have to go to this physical location. But if not, you can go anywhere you want, which basically turns all of those 38 places into voting centers. But I still have a population of people who really want that piece of paper. Okay, so I can't have, when I have over 52 ballot faces, because I have 20 cities, I have so many school boards, I have a lot of different ballot faces. I can't have 52 pre-printed ballot faces at every location. It's not economical, it's not feasible, it's not logistically possible. So that being said, that's how I was able to accomplish them being voting centers.
Okay. That's helpful, but I didn't understand it. Only one or two more. Sure. Mr. Chair. I was caught off guard a little bit, I guess, by the statement that local boards are not required to approve the voting plan. Is that our understanding as well, Taylor?
The statute does not say, clerk Summer's right, it's not in the statute that the county board has to vote. It says the county board, I'll read you the exact language. the County Board of Elections may petition the State Board of Elections to allow the consolidation of precincts. So,
And that's old statutory language based on the fact that if I had a really small precinct and I was putting it in the same building as another location and I was using the equipment, then I had to petition them under a completely different SBE 74 that basically said, I've got this little tiny precinct. I want to use my equipment better. And in Kenton County, we've kind of had that for a long time. My whole city of Villa Hills has always voted in one location, even though there were 4 precincts. My city of Fort Mitchell has voted with Lakeside Park in the same building. And those have all been approved over the years, which is the tiny ones. And that's all, and it's not the consolidation of precincts. It's the use of one building for more than one precinct. And so that's kind of a misnomer, but that is old statutory language versus what we have here.
But yet you do agree that voting plans have to be submitted to.
Absolutely. No. I just was saying a lot of other county, mine is a very involved county board. And I know that a lot of other county boards, they don't necessarily present this to their people. I mean, we've only been talking about approving plans since after 2020.
Yeah.
So they were just doing the work, moving forward. And so that's why I want to research that, because I thought, did I miss something?
I was going to say too, I don't, from the minutes you've given us, I don't think that there's, I know there is a question about was there a specific vote for this, but I don't think reading those minutes that it was not we're not voting this. It is kind of how you but I read those minutes how you described them as this is what we did in the primary. Now we're talking about these additional pending locations, which was voted on. So, it's hard to read from the minutes what exactly ever happened at the meeting, but I took the minutes to comply with the statute.
Yeah. I do think, and I mean, this throws me where it is that, I mean, I have had expectations that local boards have been approving plans and submitting. And if that's not the case, and if it's not required, then that makes me wonder why why we have local boards. But so we need to talk about that going further. It has nothing to do with today per se. The final thing, and I would submit this, I guess, to our legal minds on the board. What's your recommendation as to how we deal with Kenton County subject to DOJ approval? Is it appropriate that we approve subject to DOJ approval? Is it more appropriate to defer until DOJ approval? Or some combination that maybe I'm not considering, because I'm going to follow the recommendations of the legal minds.
Can I take a question onto your question?
Absolutely.
Which is a question for y'all. So, and if you said this earlier and I missed it, I apologize. But how many of these proposed locations are at risk of not being DOJ approved? All of them or some proportion? 14. Okay. So,
Well, actually all 38, because my remediation plan for
Right.
23 still hasn't been approved by them. And they've had that for quite a long time.
And they've also not given you a timeline.
No, so then.
But 14 are in the infancy stage of their approval.
So then the other 10 that were used before, which had ADA surveys, and those were posted on your website and everything like that, I'm required to redo those now, and then the 4 new ones.
So in theory, they could just put them all
Yes.
I guess my point of view, Mr. Johnson, is you all have to give approval or rejection, then it goes to the Secretary of State and he has time to review or reject. And then we've got this third elephant in the room, the Department of Justice that we don't deal with. If the board approves it, you send it to the Secretary of State contingent on DOJ approval, then we've got one hurdle out of the way. If we hold everything up until DOJ approves, then the board has to come back and the Secretary of State has. We're going to be in a real box trying to run an election and assign poll workers and train poll workers and just getting trained poll workers. In that consent decree, the Department of Justice is requiring us to train poll workers. An additional 2 hours of training for every poll worker They have to attend the training and certify in writing that they participated in the training on how to provide access to voting to those who have handicaps.
Well, let me clarify, though. I don't think you will be in a box. I think you're in a box.
Oh, yes, sir.
It's
just about who close to live.
Well, anyhow, I'm gonna defer to the legal lines in terms of how we move on this particular issue. I am gonna ask if Taylor will talk about afterwards about this non-requirement to approve the plan. I don't for 1 minute feel like that's the intention. When we have a requirement for plans to be submitted, if it was, we need clarity from the legislature. I will also add this because we're talking about it. I think we're going to have to continue looking for alternatives of providing baseline recommendations to clerks. So I think it's unfair to clerks to be to have to submit plans not knowing exactly what we're expecting. And so I think we're going to have to look for some opportunities for baseline information to share with you. I don't see well, but I'm looking. I do want to thank you for expanding the number of voting locations that you have. It's very frightful to me to think about if you lose 14 of those in a heavily voting general election, that there's going to be havoc. I think your lines will be back in place, even though you don't have those long ballots to look at. But so that's concerning for me. I just don't know there's a good answer. But thanks for bearing what I'm question.
Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think the answer is kind of simple. Because our admin reg has a great provision at the end that says the State Board of Elections may request at any time from any county a resubmission of the timely filed petition to consolidate precincts and precinct election officers if the petition is found to be deficient or incomplete upon review of the State Board of Elections. Basically, you've got a timely filed petition. If for some reason down the pipe that DOJ says, we're not going to use this one, the admin rate allows us to say, well, Kenton County, please resubmit it at any time.
Yeah.
So I understand the September 20th deadline as well, but I'm not too confident that DOJ cares about the September 20th deadline. But
No, she mentions that we speak to them on a regular basis, and she says, well, I have up to September 20th. And I said,
Is that
No,
part of the
no, you
consent
don't.
order?
Yes.
I said,
Doesn't
no,
mean they have to abide by it, but it's
No,
part of the
I
consent.
said,
If they're
no, that is way too far. I mean,
Yeah.
the structural part of this is there's an approval of a process. I have to call BRS and State Board of Election IT and say, can you move all these people from here to here? Then I have to make sure that I get them notified. I need a lot of time for that to happen. I might be in a heavy media market, but unless something comes in somebody's mail, they don't pay attention to that, especially when I'm saying you specifically have to go here. My other concern, and I appreciate you bringing it up, is, the SBE 74s in the past, when this all started, is if I didn't have any changes, I just told you all I didn't have a change. I didn't modify anything. I only had to do SBE 74s on the ones that I was adding. So if we're also shifting, and I need to show you that the plan was approved all at one time, it has these elements, then I need to know that, because
I understand.
I don't know how else to move forward.
That's for us to have to get guidance on.
So I think that if we go ahead today and approve it, and the DOJ comes back later on, then we can say, Kenton County, please resubmit.
And I would add, this board is not a party to this consent decree. I'm not, none of us is. So we're not bound by anything they decide. We weren't part of that process. We have our own separate process. It's dual sovereignty, as you will. So there's no reason we can't do our job. Any other questions or comments? I'd like to hear from Jason Denny, if that's okay with y'all.
Thank you.
I will be very quick.
Thank you.
We're always glad to hear from Jason.
Gabe covered this in our KCCA meeting last week, and it's actually it's frightening for a lot of clerks. I would say that we would shut down half the state or more right now if this goes forward with Kenton County. I submitted my plan. The only change to our plan is we're going to be proactive and propose adding another facility for this fall election in preparation for next year's anticipated high turnout. We want to open another school on 127, highly accessible, closer to the Frankfurt, where we have a lot of state workers coming by to alleviate some of the crowd at the drive-through facility and the middle school and community center on election day. Other than that, we pretty much stayed the same. The way we'll communicate this with the voters is I have bought 3 basically trailers with mobile signage. We'll be utilizing the newspaper, mailers to every household, telling them of these location times and dates, just like we have in the past. Social media with videos, and I have hired a marketing firm to help us with the social media to that know more about how to target Anderson County groups to keep it and be more proactive and target those Anderson County voters. So we feel very confident. We have not had issues in the past. If you look at my first letter on my plan, in the last 8 elections, except for one being 25th in the state, because there was no primaries in our county, we have been 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, 5th again, 7th, and 9th in turnout, all in the last 8 elections. That's 4 years. So I feel confident that our voters, even with the high turnout, we have kept our lines down, and we have print on demand at every facility. So every voter in Anderson County could go to any of those facilities and vote. They're not restricted, and the voters love it, that they're able to go anywhere, where they're close to. If it's close to a son's ball game, they run right over and vote. If it's on the way home, they can vote. If they don't want to go home, they can vote. So it's been great.
Any questions or comments for Jason?
Thank you.
Okay. I've actually got a question for Kenton County. You were telling us about your advertising beyond what you required about your plan. Could you tell us what your early voting plan is this time relative to last time, and what you're going to be able to do to advertise it? Because something I took away from last fall was in 2020, we had a much bigger turnout with many fewer locations compared to 2022. And the biggest difference, I think, is in 2020, a plurality of voters used early voting. 45% of voters used early voting. Roughly 28% of them voted absentee, and the remainder voted on election day. And we were able to, for the most part, avoid lines on election day because voters weren't voting on election day. We've had now a couple of elections with early voting, and roughly 15% of voters are using the early voting. And then the absentee is going back down to 2% it had been, and the rest are voting on election day. And that's about 80% of the voters showing up on one day. So my theory is that if we, again, collectively, we advertise the early voting options, they'll be utilized more, and there will be fewer people voting on Tuesday, and therefore not lines. I know in some counties, a lot of the counties in these plans, the only early voting is at the courthouse, and it's not a big venue, and they just don't have a big venue to put people. So it's not really feasible to have a huge promotion of early voting. But can you tell me what Kenton is doing relative to what it did last time in terms of how many places and what advertising you have?
Sure. So I have to start in 2020 because I was part of the KCCA executive committee at the time that helped make sure that people voted during the pandemic. And out of that is what arose the voting centers. And when you saw that volume of people use early voting, and election day was a breeze, really, I assumed that that's really, regardless of party affiliation, people wanted that. So we initially had 3 locations, and it was that was for the general, and that was fairly well used. And then when you got 2021, there was no elections. So in 2022, we thought, well, people know about this more, right? There's been advertising. We are legally required to put all the options in the newspaper. I assumed that it would be a heavily used option, and The first time we had it, it was 7%. The next time we used it, it was 5%. But we had increased, hoping that people would utilize that, increased our number from 3 locations to 5, so that we could cover geographically the county. Even though it's not being used, we have agreed as a board prior to this that we would continue to keep the 5 in the hopes that that would continue to give people flexibility throughout the county because of the locations of them. It's a lot to staff. It takes up a lot of equipment because I don't think everybody realizes that once you use an equipment in a certain set, you can't reuse it again. Okay, it's a one and done, including your e-pulpits. So that being said, we really advertise. I'm about to launch Constant Contact. These are additional costs. This is not something that, my fiscal court would pick up. It's my county. We do newspaper advertising. We just recently paid $2,500 to be on the back of what's called What's Happening, which is a community magazine that goes into everybody's home. We go out of our way to, we're about to create some videos, which we put videos out on my website. I get 8,000 hits on my website once elections start. So I'm assuming people are utilizing it because I put a lot of information out there, right? So that's what we do. And then of course there is what's required, which is the inspection ad, the ad for how to vote, all of those things. And then there's the paper ad, which has the standard sample ballots, and then all the locations and all of those things. So I also send out stuff to the media constantly because I try to get free advertising as well. I'm in a market where it's very expensive. And then it depends because Ohio has different voting times than Kentucky, and I literally can walk across the bridge and be in Ohio. I have a huge media list and I send them stuff all the time, just hoping that they will put something in there, or they'll do a PSA or something on the radio. I mean, I really worked that, but I cannot guarantee it unless I pay for it. And I do not have an advertising budget. There is no advertising budgets in any of the counties or in fiscal courts specifically for this other than what is required. And I always make them do more than what is required. So that being said, tonight I actually have a meeting based on these additional locations to ask fiscal court for additional equipment. Because, at my last, when I spread it out to 34, I had to spread out my equipment. So we try to get to everybody, but I can only put it in their mailbox. I can't make them read it. So one of the things that we do is a targeted mailer, which is something, for instance, there are certain precincts because of the way precinct rules are, that these people down here at the bottom of the hill are better served going here. But because of the way I have to create that precinct, their precinct may be over here. So we send them little notes and say, just so you know, you're assigned to this precinct, but you can go anywhere you want because I can't carve you into this precinct that assigned you there, right? So we have already prepped to do that. I had already sent that to the board and said, hey, here's two options with that. And it explains how they can do call in, how to use the portal, they can use mail in, but they can go anywhere they want. And here's the closest one to you. Now, I don't mail those until we're closer to time because people go and pitch it or they just lose it or something. But I'm not sure how else to engage people on that level. But again, our plans coming out of 2020 with the 24 locations were based on the fact that we assumed, based on the numbers, that people were going to heavily use early voting, but they are not. That's why we agreed to put additional 10 in. And why we're agreed to put an additional 4. Every county, in my opinion, has a certain culture, regardless of party affiliation, on how they vote. And obviously in Kenton County, nobody really is using the early voting. They heavily use, or used to heavily use, the 6-day or what used to be the 2 weeks of excuse voting. But that's gone down substantially too. And my mail-in is back to its normal about 3,000 ballots per election. But for the most part, there's a lot of time and money and effort for the early voting. I just wish people would use it. I just don't know how best to get them. Now, that being said, I think a lot of people used it during the pandemic because some of the advertising was coming from the Secretary of State's office. You have a much more breadth of being able to get out there. I know you
We had $1 million to the help.
so that did make a difference then, but if you have to leave that always to the counties, then fiscal courts are responsible for anything to do with elections. It is also dependent on them on whether they want to spend those kind of dollars. Mine has always been very nice to me and that says yes.
If we could just get a PSA to direct them to the state site, that would really help out. They at least know where to go with a one-size shop to look and see what every county was offering. I think we could just get that from you, the public figure, that would maybe a PSA just in a broad brush to get them to that information. I think a lot of people just maybe don't know where, some don't know where to look, some don't want to look until election day, and that's it. I'm with Gabe. My fiscal court's been great. They gave us money when I asked for it. We spend about $4,000 to $5,000 per election to send mailers to every household and the newspaper, and we're at 28% early voting. Now, we're a small county, and I think that plays into that. Because word of mouth spread seems like faster, but we're at 28% on the 2 early centers, including the 2% on absentee ballots. So I think it's just, it's going to take money. We're going to just hope if the legislature keep this up, they're going to have to get more money to help counties. And that was discussed at a legislative meeting the other day, and how much the counties, 94%, 91% of the election budget, the counties pay. Less than 10% the state pays.
Is allocated to
Is
the
allocated.
statute.
And that they'll be testimony at the state fair, there'll be testimony at DLG Thursday on that same thing. Funding is instrumental if we want to educate our voters on this new model. The ones that are using it are spreading the word and they love it, but there's others that have not utilized it, and for I don't know what reason. You know, my dad's one of those on election day. It's great, but there's others that you say, oh, I forgot about this new system. I should have came over here. They forget and they need to be reminded. Is that our problem? I feel partially it is, because we went after this legislation. We like it. The voters, most of the voters like it, but I think it's our job to help educate them.
We actually in Kenton County, when we added the additional 10, because then I spread people out, we didn't do just a household postcard. We did a actual per voter postcard that says, this is your location, but here's all your other ways to vote. That was $41,000. Plus graphic person, plus print. I mean, it was, and the majority of that was postage.
What type of increase has all these changes made just on the advertising, what you're able to spend? Is it 2 or 3 times pre-pandemic spending on advertising?
Oh,
More than that?
way more than that.
More. My gut is if we can get through 2024, when we'll see the majority of our voters go vote, that we will have covered 4 cycles in a 4-year period of this, and more voters will have known, will find out about it then. And then after that, we'll be able to cut back down on our advertising budgets. I think we have to get through that presidential election where hopefully we'll see 70-75% of our voters turn out, and word of mouth, and they'll understand that process, and we'll get them through that cycle. And maybe at that point, we'll back down and voters will get used to it, just like they did election day. The voters that want to vote early will vote early. The ones that want to vote on election day, I want to see 45% in Anderson County, 15% a day, and then 55% of the potential voters on election day. And we can handle that every day.
So right now, even if we have new voters coming in, I mean, and I would move, Bluegrass used to send them all cards. That's gone away. That's completely borne by the counties now. Organized, designed, and handled and paid for by the county. It's no longer coming out of the centralized system. So I have to get that data. I got to give it to a printer. Okay. I agree with Jason that you're looking at them being able to understand this next year, but the scariest part is, for as much as I advertise, my percentage of voters does not increase as far as the number of people who are voting.
So you're not getting any return on your investment.
And during 2020, which was so wild, it was 57%. In the prior presidential year, it was 58%. And everybody was able to, because everybody's got a precinct in their home. I mean, they had a precinct that means there were 143,000 voters registered in Kenton County during 2020, and they took that option. That means there was 143 precinct locations or polling locations because that was their house. And only 57% of them chose to ask for that ballot. I don't see an increase in people coming out with the expansion and addition of all of this advertising. I think it does take time for people to understand the flexibility that we put into the system, which I think is fabulous. It takes care of more people who are running late because I'm next to Cincinnati. Can't tell you how many people stop by my office and go, I'm not going to get home in time. And I'm like, that's okay. You can vote here. Now they have been given the opportunity to vote because there's no timing issues for them, as unless they want, you know, and then if they have to go out to Taylor Mill, that's another 20 minutes. They would not make it by 6. That took away all of those timing issues for people. And I would hate to lose that, but people, we are educating people about how to utilize it, but I mean, if you all have some suggestions on how best to explain that, and what's interesting is we are county specific, so Boone and Campbell do things a little different. We all share residence at some point in time. I do it what's best for my county, they do what's best for theirs, but they're still precinct specific. And yes, I have precinct specific ballots, but this equipment allows me to give flexibility for anybody to go anywhere. So I have 5 voting centers and I have 38 voting centers with assigned locations unless you want a pre-printed ballot. That's a lot of flexibility. I don't know how else to get it to people in one way or another. If you have suggestions, I'm open for them.
Any more questions or comments for Gabe or Jason? Okay. Thanks a lot. So the ball is in y'all's court in terms of how you want to do this. Again, I think you have a couple ways you can do it. You can pass them all, and then we'll come back in a week or two if there's any that we disagree on, or you can pass some and not pass the others, and then there's still time for the county boards to revise the plans and then bring them back the next time we gather. I did commit in our last meeting, I would call you all into a special meeting so that you have the opportunity to reconsider plans that change or to vote to override if I veto a plan. And so by the end of the meeting, we'll talk about when it's convenient for y'all to come back. But for the moment, there really is no role for me other than to entertain a motion if a member would like to move on approval.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Please.
just say a few things for, so I thought maybe just a couple of things to say about the plans that might, recap particularly for the public. One of the things that has happened is we have tried to provide historical data to all the board, including yourself and your staff, to understand that the turnout may be greater in the November election. So we wanted to make sure we got that notification out, and of course for future planning for the 2024 cycle that's about to come up. I think you heard from Gabe and from Jason. One of the things that State Board was, that we found very good about what the counties did is they did reach out to their public. They do reach out to local organizations, state representatives, state senators. They did make that effort to try and be inclusive in their plans. And in some case, maybe they met in person with some of the local organizations and other interested parties. One of the things that I want to say is how much I appreciate the clerks, and they're working very hard to get these plans. I want to thank our staff for staying on it and trying to help them understand what we need and provide them any information they might have needed in that effort. So, and then of course, having to add the parking locations that created us having to request a new SBE form. So that, you know, made it a little more problematic in just terms of trying to get all those in. But one of the things I wanted to do on a recap of the 120 plans that we've received is just to say that going through them and the board going through them and you and your staff, that 74 plans stayed the same as the primary, where they had good turn. Well, they didn't have as good a turnout as you would like, but they also were good plans. We had 19 that are opening all their precincts. We had 22 that made a change that increased. For instance, Jason's just mentioned, Gabe's just mentioned that they've increased polling locations. And then we had 6 that did a decrease. But let me go back. One of those is opening all their precincts on election day. However, they've reduced one vote center. We had, you know, a couple of others that had issues with locations, so they had to decrease. But in many cases, it was decreasing on early voting, a vote center on early voting and not necessarily on election day. We did have a couple that decreased. But I thought it might be good to recap how many stayed the same, how many are opening all their precincts. 22 are increasing their plans. There were 6 total changes. And I think of that, maybe 3 changed on early voting decrease.
2 on early voting decreases, 1, 2, 3, 1 lost because of ADA issues like Gabe.
Right. 1 reduced because they had it on the plan, and then at the last minute, they came back and declined and said, we're not going to allow the voting here.
Yeah.
So that changed, but they still ensured that geographically that area would be covered, because I think maybe the location was only a mile from where that one that was removed. So, but I do want to thank the clerks for really working with State Board and with Secretary of State's office to make sure they got those new forms in. And I know it's a lot to put on them while they have all this other election issues being part of their business every day. So, but I just thought it might be helpful if I threw out what some of the averages were of the 120 counties in an effort of approvals.
Have you identified counties that you have particular questions about, that you're likely to give information or disagree with what they propose? If we knew that, I think it would be helpful for us as well. We've got, I don't know, I've got 3 or 4 or 5 that I just question whether we've got to decide that they're inappropriate or not. But are there any that stand out to you? Not necessarily all of them, but
Yeah,
some that are particular.
yeah, there are a few. There are 99 that I think are ready to go. There are 21 that I'm not yet convinced are ready to go. It doesn't mean I'm going to veto them if y'all pass them. It's just I do have some questions. But I made a little handy dandy chart of my own, or I should say my staff did it for me, of color categories. And so I've got some that are in the red zone based on one of a few criteria. But one is, did they reduce from what they had in 2022? So Karen's point, most stay the same or increased. If I see a county decreasing, that gets my attention. It doesn't mean that it won't work, but I want to know more about it. For example, not to pick on anybody, but in Marshall County, they had all the precincts open last November, and now they're doing vote centers. And that's a new thing for Marshall County. It's a new clerk and it's a new approach. So it doesn't mean that it's flawed or bad. It just means I want to take a closer look at it. Counties that had lines, noticeable lines last time, I'm taking a very close look at those. We know what those are, from news coverage and other things that we saw that weren't covered, just calls to our hotline and so forth. So we're looking at those. To my knowledge, every county that had that situation a year ago has increased the number of locations. They've increased their early voting and or their election day voting locations. So they're probably going to be okay, but I want to take a close look at it. And then one other category is what we have found, what we saw last year is that on average, if you take the number of voters registered and you multiply by the expected turnout, and then you divide by the number of locations, you want to try to come up in a range. Most of the counties are under 1,000 voters per location on average. That's a pretty sweet spot to be in terms of avoiding lines. We do have counties that are more in the 3,000 range, and that's not a red light, but it's kind of a yellow light. So yes. So the counties that fall into one of those three broad categories, we've just marked for a closer review. That leaves 99 that we think are good to go.
Okay, that's helpful. When you mentioned your numbers, the 74 plans, the 22 and all that, was that from the primary or from last year?
That's correct. That's this year. That's the ones.
But I'm saying you said 74 plans.
Yes, from the primary. Yes, which in the primary, there were several counties that increased their locations from the November 22.
Because we had such a small turnout
Right.
in the primary, I wonder if it's more appropriate to compare to last year and then to work our way through it. So if we did the November race last year to the November race this year, and then look for those that added, you can sort of pull those out. So just wondering.
That's exactly my thought is I think our turnout this November will be comparable to last November. And so that's really a better baseline. But to Karen's point, a lot of counties, even for a primary with relatively lower turnout, still increased in May over what they had the prior November. So I see the reason for using that as a benchmark.
The thing that and I'm not even going to say we, I'm going to say I have allowed to happen with me as I think about it, is thinking that what we did in the primary, if we do the same, should be sufficient in the fall. That's just not always true because we're going to have different voting numbers. And then again, going back to which I sort of like I don't know exactly how you got to that point, but sort of this 1,000 and under per precinct seems to be a sweet spot. Is something we probably ought to talk about in terms of baseline. Now there's going to be counties and there's differences in the whole bit, but finding some way that we can give direction to clerks in terms of what we're looking for in future endeavors, I think it's going to be helpful. I think we really put clerks in a spot by not knowing what we totally expect. And I may be the worst one of the bunch to do that. And so I think we've got to talk about that a little bit, maybe between now and 24, we can talk about how we better set expectations so that they're not operating in the blind. They may not agree with their expectations, but at least there's a room for conversation. So I've got 3 or 4 I'd like to ask questions about at some point, but I'm talking a lot. I don't want to. We got a lot of smart members sitting up here on the stage that probably have questions that they want to address or around the room. So
has been I guess a thought about comparing turnout from 19, which was the total primary, which basically was similar to what I think this was as far as primaries go. Turnout and looking at, and I'm concerned about this. And I think the board probably needs to keep an eye on it so that they can keep the clerks informed if there is an issue that could be developed. In the precincts where the voting location has been removed, is there going to be a decline in participation from voters in that precinct? And I know I looked at one in our county, which is our largest precinct. They removed the polling location. from this primary election to the last gubernatorial in 19, there was almost an 8% drop in participation on that precinct. And being the largest precinct, that can change results. But have y'all considered tracking this so that information can be shared with clerks and county boards if they feel like they need to make changes, which they may not actually be aware of this happening? It may just be something that happened this time that will not happen in this fall election that we're comparing against the other one. So,
Can I say something, James? I've done that very thing
yeah,
and looked at percentages because I would worry about that. What I've seen the contests on the ballot were different in 19 than they were this time as well. There were more, could have been more of a Democratic registered precinct in the past. Now it was more of a Republican primary this time. That's why we felt like we saw the decline, a minor decline, 1 or 2% decline. So I think that's good to gauge, but I think you need to look at what's on the ballot at that time as well. And when you go to a countywide race, that's going to be very hard to do on that countywide year because it's different in every county. But I have gauged that in my county, looking to see if that really affected, and it was just such a 3-4% in one. And I believe I looked at registrations back then and now, and I believe that's what's taking place. I don't think we're going to know it for maybe 8 years, 6 to 8 years. You'll see it. I have looked at that.
the factor, and I do understand a lot of counties have switched from being one party dominant to another. Ours is not, there's been no change basically. And that's why I thought it was a pretty good gauge of what could be happening because we didn't have that switch from one party to another in our county. Matter of fact, I doubt if this percentage has changed any. But it's something I hope that will be tracked because we do not want to hurt turnout. They say they're spending thousands of dollars trying to get people to go vote. So we don't want to inadvertently do something that's going to harm turnout. It's just something I feel like bears watching and studying as time goes. But it's not been enough time to form, I think, an opinion as to whether or not it is going to be neutral in effect or negative or positive.
Well, if I could respond to that, the legal premise is that the county opened all the precincts. If they conclude that's not a good idea for some reason, then there is a process to send us a plan to review and justify why that will be okay. To the clerk's point, a very good one is this is a very expensive business running elections. And unfortunately, historically, the state has not done a good job of paying its fair share, and the feds for that matter. So I know there's a lot of things that we're talking about that would be topics for 2024 when there's a session. I think increased funding is certainly at the top of that list. I'd like more funding along the lines of what we had in 2020 for the board to, in a nonpartisan way, advertise early voting. That's one of the biggest things that helped save that election was television and radio and park benches and everything else promoting early voting. And that shifted our turnout model where it would work. I think we need that in the future. I think we need more base funding. But obviously today we can't fix all those problems.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary,
Secretary Adams.
I was going to cover in the KCCA portion is the vendors begin setting machines as early as September the 11th. And they have a schedule to travel around the state and they set that. And I understand there's some questions that you all need to raise, but your all's next meeting would be past that date. Is there a plan to have a special call? Because that was definitely, there's going to set my machines on the 11th of September. I hope I'll get approved today, but if not, then that totally throws the vendors totally off statewide to get us set in a timely manner to have the absentee ballots ready.
Yeah, I've already committed that we would come back into a special meeting over the next couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great mind.
Member Brown?
Yes, I'm not seeing your list. I've read through several times a long letter from Warren County that raises some issues about numbers of precincts that have dropped to a very low participation rate, and at the same time, the absence of a voting location downtown or in WKU's campus. I'm not sure where Warren County sits on your list and whether that's something that you are taking another look at, but I felt compelled to raise this because it was a pretty good letter.
Member Brown, I do have one on my list, and the reason is because if you do the math calculation I talked about a minute ago, they're at the high end. They come in at about 3,200 voters per location. Now, it could well be that their facilities will allow for that and that they'll get those folks through pretty quickly, but that's certainly at the high end of what we're seeing in terms of voters per location is Warren. So that is one that I think we need more time on personally.
Okay, thank you.
I would add that to my knowledge, WKU has never been a precinct voting location. So it's not like they had it and then they took it away. It's never been a voting location. To my knowledge, we've never had a campus be a voting location in Kentucky because of parking.
They claim in that letter that, I believe I saw that Murray and somebody else has a location. I have absolutely no idea whether they do or not.
UK does.
UK or UL, but a couple of, does K-State, does anybody know?
No.
K-State does not have a location.
Yeah, and I think the reason is they don't have free parking.
That's right.
You gotta take the students parking away to have parking.
You would have no parking at U of L. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Location, but I agree with Dave Michael on Warren.
Member Lane, did you have a comment as well or a question?
I just want to say how much I thank the clerks and appreciate their hard work in getting their plans to the board on time in a timely fashion, and also the staff for your hard work in keeping us informed of these plans, reviewing them, and then sending them to you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate that. As a former clerk, I know that it's been difficult, and especially now that things have changed since the pandemic. But I just really do appreciate their hard work and their good judgment in trying to get the best plan for each county presented to us. Thanks.
Mr. Secretary, would you care to share with us the 21 that are on your list so that we may know the ones that you raise concern? I know there's been several members that have indicated they may have concern about, Member Brown said Warren County, others, just so that we can all kind of see, does that encompass those that we maybe have kind of additional questions about, so we can kind of figure out how to go forward?
Yeah, I'm happy to go through my list. I can go through the ones that I think are peachy. I can go through the ones that I have questions on, however y'all would want to do it. And again,
smaller list.
Yeah, we'll do a smaller version. So again, this is not a firm stance necessarily by me that I've made a decision. It's just I have some questions and I need some time to make some calls, some additional calls. So don't be alarmed at it being 21 because this number will decrease, but I'll give you my 21. Let's see. I'm sorry, give me just 1 second. Davis. And I think I don't go through my rationale for one of these, this will take forever, but I do know there were complaints last time about the closure of a particular location and its impact. There potential disproportionate impact along racial lines. And my understanding is that location's been restored. I just want to double check that. So Davis. Yeah, you have a written list of all. These are in my spreadsheet. Actually, I had Anderson, but you're here, so I'll ask you a question. If I can ask you a question. Sure. So are all your locations kind of clustered around downtown?
Yeah.
I know we had this.
They were that way in the past before. We were already using the schools for multiple locations before this. We just don't have any. And after you put the parking criteria in there, it even limited it's even worse. No remote buildings in numerous of our precinct areas that anything. It's just the way it is. The good thing about our county is the roads are really good. The main thoroughfares into town. Our sheriff lives at the farthest out point, and he's in running the speed limit about 12 minutes to town. That's one of the farthest locations that we've got. I can only tell you of 3 questions we've had on that since 2020. And when we told individuals that there was 80 requirement they could do a balance of HDSB or illness, pretty much summed it up. They did not know that. That was an educational piece, that they did not know that they could do that, nor did they know they could get a ride to the precinct at all, no matter where it was. So that summed that up. But we have, like I said, we have seen an increase. And like I said, I read those rankings off in turnout. Our turnout has been in some of the highest in the state. With this, we've utilized these schools in the past. The SBE Board School that I'm adding this time has been a school with 3 and 4 precincts before. The middle school had 4. We have 8 of our precincts in 2 of those buildings that were already there out of the 14. So we were already voting in town pretty much before that. We had only 1 outlier, and that building has since been closed. That we can't use. The churches in Anderson County seem to want to stay away from election. And that's the only other area. And those would in no way, shape, or form pass the DOJ. If we did DOJ, we'd probably shut down some of our schools too. So we have no buildings that would qualify for that. I mean, and I've done the surveys for years. I had a disabled gentleman that's one of our election officers help me do the surveys. And he was too lenient at that time, and there's no way they would pass today. So, but we're, like I say, we're seeing actually an uptick in turnout, because, and part of it is our advertising, part of it is word of mouth and voters getting used to it, but they can get into these facilities easy. We have a big commuter base that work in Frankfort, Louisville, and Lexington, and when they come in, it directs them straight to Lawrenceburg before they can go to their outlying counties. Therefore, they're happier because they both take their time getting home, and we're seeing that. I think that's why we're seeing an increase in our turnout.
So those are good points. Every time we get the plan, we see the map, and the cluster's right there, and front stop momentarily.
4-lane highways, we're easy access is the problem. There's just no outlying buildings in most of these communities.
Oh. Well, I'm taking Anderson's off there. Thank you. Bullets. So they were a county that had lines last year. They had an excellent clerk. I just need some time to revisit their plan and what they've done differently this time versus last time. I don't think any of y'all would object on that one. Bullets. Davis, did you have anything that contribute? I know that's your home county.
Davis did get the sports center back for early voting. They added 2 locations previously from the November election into May. And they sat down with that same group, I think it was the NAACP.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they added a Nedlet Center, which was one of the 2 that they added in the primary that they didn't have in the November. So they're up to 14 locations in the 14 vote centers, and then using the sports center for early voting once again.
So they have 77,682 voters. Assume for the moment 42% turnout, which is what we had last time, and that was actually deemed to be high. When we divide that by 14 vote centers, that's 2,330 voters per location. Do you think that these locations?
Yes,
We
I
would
will.
handle
If
it.
I wasn't, yes, I gave testimony before that they had 10 check-in stations at their vote centers. They got 4,200 voters through in the one pandemic election, 4,200 voters through one vote center. So with that, with ease, with nobody waiting more than 20 minutes, with 10 check-in stations, and they have equivalent. They have several, they have, I think, 6 to 8 in some locations for check-ins. So I think that their plan would stand. I mean, we haven't had any complaints that we've heard from their plan, and I believe their plan was already, I think it was actually voted on, so.
And how are the rural areas treated?
They, if you look at their map, they've covered their rural areas pretty well.
Okay.
Mhm. So,
Any questions or comments for Richard on Davis? Okay. Grayson. Grayson decreased from this time a year ago. I'd just like to find out more information about why that has been deemed necessary. They have 22 precincts. They've gone down to 7 vote centers. That may be perfectly adequate. I just would like to double check on that. Greenup, it looks like we have some long drives from certain parts of the county that do have some population. 16 miles, 23-minute drive from the western edge of the county. Again, this may be fine, but I just want a little bit more time to run the traps. Harlan decreased. Historically, they've had their precincts open. They've gone to 18 vote centers. I love the vote center idea. I've been an advocate for it, but if there's any one county that I think is challenged with vote centers, it would be Harlan. Just the way it's laid out, the mountains, the population is dispersed. People don't go to town every day. There's long winding roads to get anywhere. So the precinct model, I think, is tailor-made for a place like Harlan. So for them to get rid of their precincts and go to vote centers, again, it may be perfectly fine. I just want to run that down a little bit more, make sure that that's justified. Henderson, they have 45 precincts. They're down to 7 vote centers. This is one of our best clerks in the state, I think, but I would like the chance to visit with her and see if 7 is going to be enough and if they have their rural areas covered well enough. Johnson, actually, I'll ask Karen for Johnson. Johnson is one of our counties that had long lines in 2022. It didn't make a lot of news because it's Johnson County. It's kind of tucked in there away from the media markets. Do you have any thoughts on Johnson's plan, whether it's adequate?
For me, and my dad still lives there, goes to the polls on election day, and yes, he did wait a little bit. One of the things that's the advantage for her in November is in May, in the primaries, the school, the downtown independent school would not allow her to use the school because it's a school day. So she has made arrangements going forward that she can use Paintsville Independent School District, where in the past they had school. She's asked, can you have that as an off day in the primary? So in May, she has used it. And I've actually asked my dad, and he said, you know, I did wait in line a little bit. He said people were trying to read the amendments, but he said I was going to stand there and vote. So he's a person who likes to go on election day. I feel like they're adequate. Now, you know, that would be, you know, a vote for the board, of course, but I do feel like that Sally has that county covered. I do know what you're speaking about in terms of, you know, 1 mile does sometimes take a little longer than it does in other counties. But I do feel like where, the schools where she has early voting, or where she has election day voting is adequate.
And the schools are in addition to the other locations that they had a year ago, or do they have the same?
No, they had the schools, they just May of 22, she was not able to use the downtown school and had to use her office when the school refused. But now the school is allowing her to have a downtown location in Paintsville, where it was a little more problematic because she had to do it in her office. There wasn't another location in downtown Paintsville that was large enough to suffice. So all of her locations are schools.
Okay, but it's the same locations as in November of last year.
Yes. But in May, she still had the same locations, but I think she was adequate. But feel free to reach out to her. She may, have some other thoughts on it.
LaRue. So LaRue has 12 precincts. And they are down to 1 vote center, 1 consolidated, and 2 standalone. That's a little wide, I think. It's 20 miles from the edge of the county to the nearest location, the eastern edge of the county to the nearest location. If you do the math, like I was talking about, it's about 1,200 voters a location. And this isn't like a super center or something. They don't really have huge buildings in LaRue County, so that might be a little tight. So that's when I do want to have a conversation about. Lawrence, we're going to ask the clerk if he can add a southern location around Lomansville. He's got 18 precincts, and they're consolidating to 4 and then 3 standalone, so 7 basically out of 18. It's probably okay, but I do want to ask him to add a location in the south. McCracken, I think McCracken's election day looks okay, but they only have 1 early voting location, and it's the courthouse. And I grew up there. I registered to vote at that courthouse. It's not a big building. There's not a lot of space for people to walk around. So I'm going to call and ask the clerk about adding another location for early voting, at least 1 more. There are buildings in Paducah that can manage crowds, I think, better than the courthouse. Madison has 47 precincts. They are offering 8 vote centers. Madison's a place that we saw some long lines a year ago. If you take their voter population of 73,910 times 0.42 divided by 8, that's 3,880 voters per location. That's definitely at the high end. That's higher than Warren. So again, it may be fine, but I think we need to do some homework on that one. Marshall, I've mentioned this before. They went from all their precincts open to 9 vote centers. Again, that may be perfectly adequate. I just want some more time to look at that. Oldham, that's another place that we had significant lines last year. Multiply their voter population by locations. They did increase the number of locations. The math will get you 2614 per location. So I think that's going to be not as heavy as, say, what Madison is suggesting or Warren. I'm thinking we might still need some more locations though at Oldham, given the experience. So I would hold on that one. Owsley, every single time I've been in office, at least Owsley has 8 precincts, and they open up 1 place to vote. I don't know that we can just let this go every single time. I think that's not adequate. What if there's a problem? I think just 1 place to vote for a county is is too restrictive. I thought that about Carroll County last year. I think that about Owsley County every year. So I do want to speak with the clerk in Owsley. Let's see. I thought we were good with Russell. No?
I think we're just looking at the area.
Yeah.
It's like about a 27-mile distance from the hauling location.
Yeah, that's a tough lake.
Yeah, it's hard to get around that way, because
So-
they have to cross into another county to get back into the hauling location.
So every election we get concern calls about the JBS precinct that used to be open and then it's been closed and it's part of the county that you drive out of the county. To get into, it's a difficult location to serve, but it's also a place that does have people that are used to voting in JBS versus having to leave the county, then go to Russell Springs or Jamestown. So it's probably going to be okay, but I want to revisit it one more time.
A challenge for everything. We were talking infrastructure, medical, EMS.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really a challenge. It's the lake. It's so far to go around. We don't have a ferry. We need a ferry to make it every
Scott County, I have gotten some calls about a couple of areas that are underserved, that are a 20-minute drive or more from the voting location. So I do want some more time to look at Scott. Warren, that we talked about. And then Woodford, I thought we were going to have the clerk for this virtually today.
I can send her the Zoom. Health issues, she was not able to be here in person, but we can send, she has the Zoom link and is maybe watching, and I can ask her to join the meeting if appropriate.
Yeah.
Woodford. Would you like me to have her, because she is watching, I'm sure.
It's up to y'all. If y'all want to dial clerks and ask me questions now, we can do that, or we can come back and do it later. We get complaints every election about 4 vote centers for 19 precincts. So I do want to hold that one. We don't have member Chandler with us. If we pick this up next time, you can probably get his perspective as someone who lives in Woodford. How many was that? Was that 20? Did someone count?
But that's.
That's 18 by my count.
Yeah, that's what I got.
I've got 19 minus Anderson's 18.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there were some that I had on my list and we talked about them, so I took them off, but that sounds about right.
Well, let me ask again for clarity. So if we don't approve a plan, then you don't have ability to deal with that particular issue. Is that what I understood you to say?
Yeah, it's a one-way street. If you all don't approve a plan, I can't save it, right? If you approve a plan, I can veto it and then you can override me, but it doesn't work in reverse.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking that way, but it makes sense.
Of the 18 that you mentioned, are there?
Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary,
Yes.
may I say something, please?
Please.
Again,
I'm sorry, I'll come back to you. Sorry.
Lynette Yates from Warren County has sent me a text about her plan. And is this the appropriate time to share that?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Those comments, she had some additional information she would like for the board to know. She
Okay.
said they have added a downtown location and providing transportation there. And she said their vote centers are huge. We have 6 to 15 clerks at locations, and that votes a lot of people. And then they also have a couple of smaller locations on election day. And they have proposed for next year to add 3 more sites. But right now they don't have enough equipment to do that. But next year that is their proposal. So she asked that I share that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lynette is an outstanding clerk. I've never got any negative feedback from her county about her operation there. I have a great deal of confidence in her. I just would like to have a little more time to sort that out with her. I skipped one. I apologize to everybody. Lewis County, they have 14 precincts, and that is a massive county geographically. 14 precincts, 4 vote centers. That's a good 15 to 20 miles from the outer edges of the county for folks. So again, it may be fine, but I do want to check with the clerk on it. You were saying something.
Well, no, my question was that you had mentioned 18 or 19 counties. Are there any additional counties that our group has?
Yeah, I was gonna ask
And
the same.
maybe we consolidate those numbers and approve everything else and then come back and follow up with what we've not touched on.
Yeah.
We know that a couple of us have questions about Warren County, so that's one. What are the 6 counties that decreased the number of locations?
Well, one of them was Carter County. They're opening all their precincts on election day. They only decreased 1 vote center early vote.
How many does that leave? Do you know?
They have 1 vote center on early voting instead
Had
of
2.
They had 2, but they've gone to 1 on early voting. Graves County is the county that had to decrease church, withdrew their polling location toward the end, and they just tried to ensure they would have, adequate geographic there, and I believe they did. But that was a decrease, and that was on election day, but they have adequate, they have, good vote centers. Christian County decreased 3 vote centers on election day. I believe their early voting centers are the same. They increased by 1, that's right. So Christian increased 1 on early voting, and they decreased 3 on election day. Bullitt County has 8 vote centers on election day, which is a significant increase from 22. I believe it's 4 vote centers he's increased from November of 22. And he had to reduce, he has 2 early voting centers, right, Richard?
He has 3, he reduced by 1. He had
Okay,
4.
so he has 3. He had 4 early voting in May, but he had to decrease by 1 early voting, and that's the only decrease he made. It was an early voting center, not the election day. And I think some of his issue too is Burnham Forest is there, and that's a pretty significant piece of property in his county that, he has to go on the edges of the forest. So how many did I say?
Boone County.
Boone, that's right. Boone had to decrease 5 precincts. They took those precincts and consolidated them due to ABH.
So they went from, if I remember, they had
53 locations.
53, right, and they
Voting.
reduced on election day.
53 locations on election day,
and they dropped to
48.
48.
Yes,
And how many of those are vote centers?
They are 15 consolidated locations and 33 standalone precincts.
right, they are opening all the precincts on election day. They have consolidated
They're gonna be
precincts
all either consolidated
or
precincts.
or
No
single
vote
standard.
on
No,
election.
they have they have vote centers
Or-
early. But they did have 5 precincts that they had to consolidate with other precincts in an effort to meet ADA requirements. So that was,
And
I believe.
And then Jefferson lost 1 location, but they still have 207.
Yeah, that's something that we haven't talked about is a pretty robust poll offering in Jefferson and Fayette. Those are counties that have had some issues in the past with locations, and they're basically opening all their precincts.
They do still struggle with workers though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they struggle with workers.
Well,
They do consolidate.
It doesn't look like we have many, well, I guess we have 2 or 3 that overlap.
I think Bullitt was one Secretary mentioned.
We had Warren.
I'm trying to think how many vote centers he increased. Did did we say that he increased 4 vote centers
Which one?
from Bullitt from November of 22 to May of 20?
If I remember, he was 5 and he went to 8.
Anyway,
I think he went to 5 or 8. I
in
think.
May 22.
on behalf of the clerks. While we're kind of going towards what looks to be more of a mathematical way of deciding if there's an appropriate amount of spots or not, you can't just base it on registered voters. That number could be 4,000 and I have 1,500 of them are inactive. It's the percentage that votes and the access. I appreciate wanting to make things available, but I have to tell you, after COVID, a lot of my locations looked at me and went, we don't want you back. They do not have to say yes to us. On top of me having to meet all these ADA requirements, plus being able to staff them, you may have lines, not because you don't have enough locations, but enough people to actually, and I've got people coming forward, but who else is in that pipeline? Not a whole lot of people. So I appreciate that we're getting to a more standard way of looking like we need this. And if you read my letter, I kind of do that already, which is my biggest pinch point is how fast can you get people through the line? So I need more clerks and I need somebody watching somebody put a ballot through the machine and things of that nature. This whole structure has changed. But by offering people the ability to have voting centers, they thought they had the authority to look at that and say, okay, voting centers works for my county. And we are going back to say, no, we want this past structure. And that's fine. But the guidance, as you stated, has to be there because at some point, all those other factors have to be in there. I've asked not 1,000, but I've asked a lot of places, can I come back to you? No, it was too much of a hassle, or we make more money as a reception hall, or we have a daycare here and we don't like people out here. I not only have to do that with this new DOJ, I have to have election day surveyors that go out. I have to, a lot of my places are concerned. I have to have my sheriff or police be present in a lot of my locations. I just want you to be aware of some of these things that you're asking. They may not be able to achieve this time and they can work towards the future, but those are some factors that really are going to make it hard for people to be able to work in locations.
So I want to add, first of all, I'm a huge vote center proponent. I think voting centers are one of the best things that we've done in the state for a long time. But I don't think it's an either or. I think there are places, and we notice that use vote centers. I don't think vote centers were ever meant to totally replace precincts. That was never the intention. It was an add-on in terms of another way for you to be able to provide access. I like them a lot. I would never be at the position that we used only one metric to determine how many precincts or vote centers that should be. I think there's a number of things. Geography has to be considered. Number of people in a place has to be considered. Equipment has to be considered. Number of people that you have, money to run it. There's a number of things. My concern is that we're working with the clerks and then the legislature find a baseline approach that can be waived if there are particular reasons. Having a DOJ down your back is something that causes us to have to figure out maybe a different way of doing it. So I don't want, from my perspective, to leave the impression that I think, oh, we say 1,000 voters and that's it, because that's not at all.
Okay.
But I do think it's unfair for clerks for us to subjectively sit here and say, well, we just don't like your plan because I just don't like it. I think we've got to have some kind of foundational direction, if you will, but that'll be determined in my mind working with clerks, not outside.
I appreciate that. I just know how hard it was and hard it was to recruit people, even if I have them there. And I may have a pinch point if I don't have enough clerks. I might have enough doors open, but I may not have enough people to sit there and get people through that.
We've got to find more money for elections. I mean, that has to happen.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And if that's worked out, that gives us some guidance. And then we can come back and again, explain where we came from on our plan perspective.
I will say this, that we've increased monetarily our election officers and they still last.
Still doesn't do it.
We're at over $15 per hour.
Yeah, I noticed some did this thing.
And we've still seen a decrease. If we had to go to precinct model today, we would fall flat on our face and fail. If we didn't have vote centers in our county, we would fail for sure because we've been able to consolidate and use a lot of same election officers helping do different things in that facility. So I don't know, COVID did a lot. It took a lot of our elderly ones that were still good functioning adults that knew their job and it took them out of their families
we're in a
and
new
one of
normal.
working in. And then now, I've reached out to teachers, our schools, our local community college. Nothing as of yet. Social media blast, flyers at every bank laying around, churches, etc. And still 1 to 2 maybe, and then call back and you'll have a cancel. As soon as you gain 1, you lose 2. It's not the opposite. You don't gain 2, lose 1. And I don't know where we're going with this. We can throw all the money, we can throw money and we need money. Because we need equipment. But if you don't have staffing, it doesn't matter how, I added a center. I'm not staffed for it yet. I'm hoping I'm staffed for it before election day. And we're begging people. Almost browbeating people into guilt. You need to do this public service, reaching out to our Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs and Lions clubs. Hey, you need to do a civic service. You need to work and you can take this money and donate to your club if you want to, whatever you need to do with that. And we're still just, it's not, there's the warm and fuzzy about elections and that's nationwide is not there. And I don't know how we're going to overcome that.
I'm sorry. I was just going to reiterate that Sandy Jones is available to get on Zoom right now. It was
From where?
from Woodford.
Oh.
It was my suggestion that she not be here because of her current health issue and felt it was a danger for her to be in the room. If anyone has any questions or would like to, if any of the other board members or if you have a question for her, she is more than happy to jump on Zoom right now.
I don't have any questions. I don't know about the others.
I was gonna add that we added in your summary sheet, a historical tracking of the governor's elections in there. On the formula factor, we do have to consider the percentage of early voters that might come off of that total number. And that might be something just to consider if we use that going forward.
Okay, that's helpful. Listen, what the work you all do, we'll get around to it again. I know the secretary has already said it, but it's been an amazing process to watch this time, as early as we are within this process of the new way of doing things, the new normal, to see how the clerks have responded, to see staff in the Board of Elections, to see the Secretary of State's office staff. This has been a remarkable process. We're not done, but we are refining that process, and I've been happy with what I've seen during this time. I'm just as one member of this board. Not that I was unhappy before, it's just it gets tougher every year, it seems. So
I agree. Thank you.
And Karen, did you say Sandy was willing to get on to answer any questions?
Yes.
And I know it seemed like the secretary maybe had some questions on, I think if there's anything that we can have a discussion and answer, it'd be good for all of us to hear the questions, but also to hear her answers so that, it can clear up any confusion for all of us.
I had actually sent her the Zoom link and just said, wait and see, rather than try to do something on phone. So Richard, she's probably going to jump on the Zoom link here if you can accept her in.
While we have a moment, Mr. Secretary, I think I heard Member Sears start to suggest that maybe where we head with the motion is that those counties where there's no open questions by the time we're ready to vote, maybe we vote to put those plans through and then hold the remainder for whatever comeback meeting, because with the concerns you've laid out, hearing that there may end up being no reason not to approve the plan, at least I'm not comfortable voting for counties where those questions still remain open. So at least, picking up where Member Sears was, that's where I think I would be, and I'm only one member, comfortable voting when we get to the point of the motion.
Well, we have a clerk from Woodford County on, but I think we're in a position when she's done for, I guess, Member Skolnick or Member Sears to make a motion, and we'll just, I guess, move to approve the ones that I didn't just mention, or however or add whatever ones you want to the list, of course, if you wish. But I think you're right. I think we're about there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello there. Can you hear us okay?
She's muted.
Whoever Sears to make a motion,
Hi, good morning.
I guess, move to approve the ones that I didn't just mention, or add the ones you want to, of course, if you wish.
Hi, Sandy, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh,
Thank you.
good. Okay. Could you mute the other us?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Thank you for allowing me to come on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. How do we get through it?
Tell her to turn off the YouTube.
Could you turn off the YouTube for us?
Okay, give me, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
We're getting
Stephen back.
Yeah.
Okay, could you move the other us?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Thank you for allowing me to come
Could
on.
you please turn off the YouTube?
Yes. Yes, just give me one moment.
Oh, okay.
Could you turn off the YouTube?
Yes. Okay, give me.
We're getting Stephen back. Yeah. Okay. Could you move the other us?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Thank you for allowing me to come on.
There we go.
So thank you for being with us on short notice. If you want to offer any opening comments, we're all ears, or we can go right into questions.
She's been trying to figure out.
Can you call her office?
Yeah.
So thank you for being with us on short notice. If you want to offer
Just X out the.
any comments, we're all ears, or we can go right into questions.
I can't get my YouTube to turn off. If you'll come back to me just a moment, please.
Okay, no problem.
So thank you for being with us on short notice. If you want to offer just X out any comments, all ears, or we can go right into questions.
I can't get my YouTube to turn off. If you'll come back to me just a moment, please.
Okay, no problem.
How about now?
She's got her
Oh,
mute on the other one, I think.
could you unmute yourself, please? Okay. Can you hear us?
I can't hear you. I apologize for that. That was rather chaotic. I could not go off. I'm so sorry.
No worries at all. So
I had-
if you'd like, you can kind of offer some opening comments if you want, or we can go into questions, whatever you prefer.
Could you unmute yourself, please?
I am unmuted.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? I
Yes.
can't hear you. I apologize for that. That was rather chaotic. I could not go off. I'm so sorry.
The call and do the
Yeah.
cell phone,
Tell
or somebody's cell
If
phone.
you'd like, you
her to cut off and do a call.
any comments if you want, or we can go into questions, whatever you know. Could you unmute?
I will do my best. For some reason, we have a delay. I am unmuted.
We're going to call you. Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to just log off, we'll just call you.
Mhm. It's not working. It's do my best. For some reason, we have them done.
It's the YouTube doing the feedback, so log off both, just X out of both, there we go. And we're gonna call, we'll call you. I think she will just go out to call her.
Oh,
Well, then I'll call her self. So that she's.
yeah, we can fight for here in a minute. If we have to.
Okay, I'll just tell her.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever you all like, sure. Can you hear us? Sandy, could you come off of the mute?
Now, I think we're in real time. There was a delay and then there was an echo, and anything that could have happened. You will remember this meeting as well as I will. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Okay, so if you want to offer any opening comments, feel free, or we can just go into questions.
Yes, I would be pleased to, and I thank you for this opportunity, as painful as it has been for you all. I wasn't able to come and attend today because of some health issues, and I appreciate this more than you know. Yes, I do want you to know that our voting center at Falling Springs and the other 3 that have been added have been absolutely so well accepted in Woodford County that I couldn't even begin to give you the number of people who would leave the voting center at Falling Springs and give us the okay, like this was great. It was fast moving. It was economically possible for us to do it without any strain. Our precinct election officers decreased, so I have the best of the best in Woodford County, the same committed, dedicated precinct election officers that have been there every year. I'm like everybody else, you know, I have a difficult time finding enough, but with the decrease in numbers, I'm very well pleased with the ones that come back every year. And it would be a strain if we had to go back to the 19 precincts. And I understand some people like to have their precinct in their back door, and I appreciate their views as well. But for the efficiency and just the pure ease of the voters getting in and out of their voting centers, it would be devastating for us to go back to the 19 precincts. That's about all I needed to say. Thank you.
And you all are usually the #1 county in the state for turnout, aren't you?
We are high right up there with Anderson County and a few others. Yes, sir.
So if y'all had 50% turnout, which I think is probably a good bet for November, that's several ticks higher than the statewide average. If we were to divide that, 22,000 voters, half of that would be 11,000. Voting at 4 vote centers would be pretty close to 3,000 per location. Do you think that that's enough?
I do. Yes, sir, I do. Just for the pure fact that Falling Springs, we have 3 courts, 3 basketball courts. We have the egress and ingress of coming in and out of Falling Springs, not just the parking, but the actual center itself has been nothing but an ease to come in and out of. Yes, and I think that would accommodate, well, in 2020, that's all we had. You know, our voting center, we handled the entire county at Falling Springs. So the facility in itself, I just can't say enough good things about, you know, everything that all the voters have enjoyed out there. So it can easily handle. And the other voting centers that we have, one is in the southern part of the county in Nonsuch, the other is in Midway, and then over in the northwestern part of Millville, close to the Franklin County line. We've got it where it's distributed evenly throughout the county.
Could I ask, if you look at adding one on Lexington Road in the east part of the county, I know you have a lot of commuters into Fayette. And I know that's one of the big selling points of the vote center is you catch the commuters on their way to work. out of the county. I know that's true of Grant County, that's true of Anderson County. Have you added a place out there?
That has been proposed. We did discuss that in our last County Board of Election meeting, and our board members voted on this particular plan for the general election, knowing that we don't have any more machines at this point. We've utilized all of our machines, and the others that we have approved from our grant money, our grant money it is on order, and we haven't been able to get them in, and we're told from our vendor HARP that we will not get those in until hopefully before the primary in 2024. But that has been proposed, and it is something that we're looking at to add another vote center because that has been voiced to us.
So you've ordered new machines. These are additional machines, or are these replacements?
They are additional machines for any growth that we had to utilize here in the county.
So you do think you're going to be able to add more locations in 2024?
Yes, sir. That is definitely on our agenda to review, and it was just recently discussed at our last County Board of Election meeting.
Any other questions or comments from members?
Only thing I will say, you mentioned Ben, he's a resident of Woodford, and he is out of the country, and I did reach out to him to see if he had any concerns before the meeting, knowing he wouldn't be able to Zoom today. He did not mention his home county.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a question. I'm just curious, just because I think it helps to know how robust is the early voting in Woodford County, because obviously that would, help relieve some of the election day stress if there's a fairly robust early voting. I know it hasn't taken hold in all of our counties like it has in some. I was just kind of curious where that falls in Woodford.
We were down. We're like the other counties at this point, in spite of everything that we have done to advertise. We don't have the media segment that the larger counties have, but we've utilized everything by putting things in their mailbox and doing postcards. And, we had a tremendous turnout during the pandemic. We did without any problem. We had it here at the courthouse at that time, and there were 2 days we ran over 1,000 voters. We haven't seen numbers like that in spite of everything that we've done, and I don't really know what else to do. We're going to hit it hard again as far as advertising and promote, but that's a choice. And we have moved our early voting out to Falling Springs just because parking around a courthouse is historically difficult. So we do have more than adequate parking out there. So as far as increasing the numbers, it's just kind of, I don't know, one of those things you hope for.
Right. And I think I remember even sometimes it all runs together in my head because we look at so many of these plans in so many counties, but I think you even added a location in the last cycle. Am I correct?
We did last primary. Yes. 23.
Okay,
We added Millville.
And as far as, do you have any information about how your turnout dispersed across the locations that you had?
It was comparable to what we would have had during precinct voting. We didn't have a lot of people that swayed, like they had always would vote in Millville, but this time I'm going to go to Falling Springs. They pretty much stayed in their areas. But we did have that same flexibility that any voter could have gone to any one of the 4.
Okay, but did it seem like it was fairly evenly dispersed across the locations that you had?
It did. Yes, it did.
I think that takes care of my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, any other members? Okay, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your patience.
Not at all. Thank you very much. So if there's any other discussion, let's have that. But if not, I'm going to go, I think, back to Member Sears and Member Stolnick and try to get a motion.
Do we have additional counties that we wanted to add to that?
I have 3 or 4 that I'd like to suggest, and it's really probably only 3 because Warren's on your list, right? Carter, Christian, and Boone are 3 that I'd like to have some additional conversation, I guess, and review on. Was this one just acceptable, or are you gonna leave it on your list?
I'd like to leave it.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
So you've still got 819.
Don't trust my math, but I'm gonna double check. I thought it was 18.
You added Lewis,
Yeah.
That's right. So it is 19.
so you're 19 plus anybody else is good. So how do we do this? To where you can, I mean, I'm still a little confused on the process, so.
It's new,
If,
so
if we just hold these until a later point, there's really nothing for you to veto on these. I guess we could just come back in a session and then work through them, maybe. I mean, that's what I'm trying to get to is.
So what we could do is, obviously I want to have the kind of conversations that I just had with our clerks here.
Yeah.
And you all probably want to have those conversations too. And so if we have a follow-up meeting, we can invite those clerks from those counties to present if they wish or answer questions. I think kind of where we're going though is a motion to approve all but, and then list 19 plus 3 or whatever you all add. Is that, do you all agree with that approach?
I'm
That's what I was thinking.
Okay, so I'm gonna write down my list.
I
Oh,
had
please.
96 that was correct, could be approved. And then with what you had and with what Karen added was 24.
No,
With your 6 and what
well,
you
they
had.
didn't list all those
Yeah,
6.
yeah, we're not going with all 6. Unless
I
the
don't-
group wants to.
I
There was-
totaled up 19 for Mr. Secretary, Chairman, and 3 for, so that.
I wrote down a list if you want me to read it and you all
I
can.
have 22.
Here's a question I did.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, James has.
I do have a question. Follow-up meeting. Machines are gonna need, vendor are gonna need time. What date do you say they were? going to-
I know I'm set for the 11th, and I feel certain I'm wanting first because they always ask for close and I tell them, come on. But September the 11th is some of the first setting, and then that's with HARP. I don't know when ESNS starts, with HARP has close to 90 counties, and talking about setting all those counties, and once you deviate from your schedule of travel around the state, it makes it even takes longer if they have to go back and forth. So the sooner the better. I mean, it's just,
Yeah, that definitely needs to be
It's crucial.
probably before the middle of September. So
oh,
that-
definitely.
Oh, I would want to do this in a week or two.
Okay,
Yeah, if that would suit you all in your schedules. Like before Labor Day,
that's why
definitely.
make sure we don't
Yeah.
put the counties in a position where they can basically meet the deadline they've got and the vendors.
No, I want this out of our hair by the end of the month for everyone's benefit, absolutely. So I'm double checking my list. Give me just a moment.
So I have 22 here. The 3 that Jerry mentioned,
There may be others. but,
and I'm not sure what others, you had 19, but you had 1 in common. You had,
Yeah, I had 4 and one of them was in common.
right, so I had 22
Yeah, that's what I,
is the number that,
plus what any of the other members may have.
just your information, I texted Bobby Gantley about the setting of the machines.
97 counties.
And 9/11 is the first date that he mentioned, and that's when they already have their schedule beginning on September 11th.
I'll be done in about 1 second. And I'll put through my list, which is shorter than what I started out with. I got some good answers to my questions. Okay, so here's what I think we're gonna have as a motion. The motion, well, I won't make it, but if I understand this where we are correctly, then the motion would be to approve all plans but for Boone, Carter, and Christian, Bullitt, Davis, Grayson, Greenup, Harlan, Henderson, Johnson, LaRue, Lawrence, Lewis, McCracken, Madison, Marshall, Oldham, Owsley, Russell, Scott, and William. Does anyone want to add any to that list?
So you went through Warren, Woodford, and Lewis. Did I hear that right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're still at 19.
Yes, I think it's, I think I
1,
was
2,
looking
3,
through
4,
and it
5,
was like
6,
it's
7,
still.
8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 19 of mine and 3 of Member Johnson's.
Right,
And then
one
whatever
you all
else.
had.
And then whatever else you all may choose to add. So if no member has an additional county besides the ones that we've identified, then I think the motion would be to approve all remaining 98 county plans as proposed.
All right, I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
I'll third.
Any discussion? Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Ayes have it. So we'll be able to provide notice now to 98 of our county clerks so they can get moving. And then I would like to come back in the next 2 weeks, if that suits you all, and not miss a beat, and hopefully be able to approve these others, or at least raise our concerns if we have them. I know that we do have some county local input that we've gotten in the form of letters and calls and so forth. We want to run those traps, but I think we're in a really good place right now. So thanks everyone for your patience. I'll try to go through the rest of our agenda very fast. Approval of additional precinct officers pursuant to KRS 1170456, Boone County.
This is, Boone County that makes this request each election in advance. They have, a deputy at each one, an additional election officer in the form of a deputy at each of their precincts. And in this case, it's 48 that they're requesting, and it's something they do each election. So I would ask the board to recommend approval of that.
Is there a motion?
Yes, I make that motion.
Second? Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. All right, Ms. Pointer, it's your turn.
My presentation will pale in comparison to what you just went through. So I'll keep it pretty short and sweet. So pages 9 through 18 in your board book, those are your closeout that I promised you for fiscal year 23. Nothing major at the end, just a few calculations that that fell outside of when we had our meeting. So they happened at the very end of July. On page 19 is the start of FY 24. And really there in the operating expenses, everything is pretty typical, for first quarter payments of rent and things like that. But there is a $57,000 charge for telecommunications. That is for MiFi devices that were used in June. So that was post-election. AT&T and Verizon for Cradle Points, they bill in arrears. So that's why you're seeing it now. There's another, under other expenses, there's the ERIC dues, and that is your other high charge for that.
Where is that on here?
It's on page 19. It's on 19, but you can see it more in depth on 20. They're both at the bottom of each column, those two that we were speaking about.
Which the other expenses?
Mhm.
Oh, okay, I see it.
Yeah, that's your ERIC dues, and then telecommunications is your Wi-Fi charges or MiFi charges for AT&T.
And that that's the number that we expected, right? Based on the information that we had earlier this summer.
Yes.
That number though is not gonna go up, even though Texas left Eric.
Not
Not this fiscal year?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Those were paid in July for 24.
Okay.
Not a lot of charges and everything else, basically just some interest, which it looks like our interest is lining out more regularly than that dip that we had experienced during the pandemic. And that is all I really have, unless you all have any questions about the financials for the transactions. I'd like to also say that we did turn in our quarterly report for our election security grant, so we're waiting EAC to approve that. We've also submitted our FY23 closing package and our FY23 CFA forms, so we're just waiting for approval from the Finance Cabinet and Statewide County for those things.
And to add, we submitted a purchase.
We did.
We
Did
submitted.
submit the market.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments for Rachel? If not, can we get a motion to approve the reports? Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, so I think we're almost done. We do have a closed session at the end. Do we have KCCA presenting today?
We're here for Stephanie.
Oh,
Stephanie, yeah, he's here.
Yes,
Also, on behalf of Stephanie.
She has to jump. She had this. So I'll make this quick. Thank you all for letting us come. We appreciate being asked to give a little wrap up each month. As you all know, we've all been dealing with open records request. Continue to deal with records request about elections on a daily basis, and hopefully that'll be some discussion that we move forward as we get together toward legislative days. We feel that most of the state, a lot of the counties have been going to print on demand, which will alleviate some of the issues that we've seen in the past with planning. Where a voter may or may not go with a vote center. It's very hard with ordering ballots to know how many are going to come here, there, and shuffling ballots. So the print on demand process will speed that up. As Gabe said, she gave an extensive training the other day on the ADA. You might want to sit through that hour, and it just barely touched the surface in an hour of how this is going to affect us all as we move down the pike. We all remember ADA surveys years ago, but they were it was Sharon Fields back in the day that helped and trained us and went through those, and we all had to do those. And we all at that point dreaded those surveys. Well, there's no dread, is just not even close to what we're seeing here. There's a tabletop exercise. I believe there's one tomorrow, and then we're doing some stuff at the KCCA, the next meeting on security and things like that. We're seeing nationwide security issues at polls, election officers being threatened, election officials being threatened. We all worry about that, and we're all working on security plans for those facilities. As meant with several other counties, we all look and are trying to find ways to have law enforcement at our polling locations every day. The early 3 days and election day because of these issues, especially at some of the buildings we're in. We appreciate you viewing these vote center plans. We've worked very hard. We just need to remember each year. So one of the vendors have texted me back and forth. The 28th is certification. Is there any way possible as we move forward, we can have this next meeting before the 28th so that these plans are approved when the ballot is certified and they're ready to go with programming of the machines in timely manner? And the 28th is on a Monday, and I thought that had addition 28th. We definitely need additional funding for support equipment, not just the voting equipment. We need more voting stands. If we're increasing our vote centers, we need more places for them to stand and vote or sit and vote, and we don't have that. And these vote stands are, these 4 places vote stands are $1,200–1,300 a piece for voters. The singles are getting up there, so it doesn't matter if you buy the singles or buy the quadruples, you're running around that amount, $250–300 per stand. in some cases. So as we add equipment to be sure the flow goes through, we need money for equipment, and we definitely need money for advertising. I believe that's the only way. And advertising per se, maybe for the counties, some of that advertising funds may be at the state level for you to help us get the message out to the voters, and for election officers, etc. We do appreciate the collaboration between SBE, SOS, our legislators, and KCCA as we move forward to continuous improvement in elections. So we really appreciate the working relationship to get together, get our heads together, and figure out what's not what we per se want to do. You know, it's what's best for our constituents. While we realize, and I hope you all realize, that we as a local elected official are on the hook if we fail. If my vote plan that I propose to my board and my board votes, but it's on me, it's not on my sheriff, it's not on my Republican member, it's not on my Democratic member, and it's not on you. It all falls. If Anderson County fails, I'm done. And I think we have the elected person, the elected official in the county will take more heat for it than anybody if it fails. And we're going to be the ones to fix it quicker than anybody. And we've moved forward. We've learned from some inadequate plans. And I think we've all worked together to help each other improve our plans. So I feel like we've done that, but I appreciate you all's questions. I really do. And as we work forward, if we can do anything for all this, let us know.
Thanks. Any questions or comments for Jason? Okay.
Up the good work.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Executive Director.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. I just wanted to provide an update on the e-poll book decommissioning process that is underway. 113 county e-poll books have been decommissioned. 7 are either in transit or waiting to be picked up. So that process, maybe even by the time we have a special meeting, it may be complete. I wanted to mention that, you know, Jason was talking about security, and I've been working with him and Stephanie and Tabitha on having some very pointed discussions at the November conference from EISAC, which is the Election Infrastructure Sharing and Analysis Center, on security, cybersecurity. They're going to come to the November meeting. I've spoken with commissioners at the Election Assistance Commission. That group has said they would be happy to come in November. I also have talked to someone from Arizona who experienced physical and security during her tenure. And she did a wonderful presentation recently at a conference, and our clerks need to hear. It is phenomenal, the things you don't think about, the not so obvious. So really working, and I know Jason, we've talked about this and how important it is that the counties get some of this information, because you don't really understand what's there and what resources may be there. So we're going to do that in November, looking toward the 24 election cycle. I want to piggyback about the funding that Jason mentioned. I was asked to come to the budget subcommittee on general government, and I asked Tabitha to weigh in on the presentation. We did a survey, a real quick survey with the counties on what their expenses were, and we had 70 counties participate in 4 days, because I only had a few days to get the presentation ready. And it was, like Jason said, much of the expense that they reported on these spreadsheets had to do with advertising. Some counties had as much as 30, 40, 50,000 in advertising when you're looking at postage. And so many rural counties don't have the advantage of that. And based on what is allocated by the state for funding and what the cost is to the fiscal courts who are required to pay to conduct the election, was 91 to 9%. And I think it got some attention. So we are also, Tabitha's gonna join me on Thursday. We're doing it again at the DLG Governor's Local Conference for the magistrates and judge executives. So they can have an understanding that this isn't just, they're not coming just to ask. I mean, there is a purpose to what their need is. So we're gonna be doing that on Thursday as well. And I think that, and then again, like Jason said, looking forward toward the 24 General Assembly, and we have some data prepared for them to see what kind of costs it is, because I think some of the costs are fairly shocking, as Gabe even said as well in hers. On Sunday, I was asked to be part of an election panel at NCSL, which is the National Conference of State Legislators. It was a panel of Indiana directors and the Minnesota director. And we talked about election security, had an opportunity to talk about, you know, the things we're doing in Kentucky at the state board by having our in-house domestic software and services. And you would be surprised the reaction that was in the room of, my goodness, you all do that yourself. So, and they actually, on another presentation, had our our election night reporting on a presentation at another presentation, using us as an example. So I was pretty proud of our IT team that put that together, and I saw it at a national conference on a PowerPoint. So, and spoke to the person after. So that was really good. And then lastly, I want to say congratulations to Taylor Brown. He is graduating this month from CIRA, which is the Certified Elections and Registration Administrator program, and that's in partnership with Auburn University and the Elections Center. So, proud of Taylor for getting through that, and I'm sorry if I took too much time.
When you said Taylor is graduating, my heart has stopped. Something like, isn't he our attorney? He graduated already? But congratulations, Taylor. Any questions or comments for Karen? Okay, is there any other business before the board? If not, all we have left is to confirm. Well, we'll confirm our regular meeting date. We'll also discuss a special meeting date. And then we do have a very short closed session coming up as well. But beyond those items, is there any other business? Okay, we've done a lot of business already. So we will have our next regular meeting on Tuesday, September 19th, same time, same channel. If you all would like to go ahead and look at your calendars for what we might call a special meeting. I think Jason is right. I'd like to do this in August if y'all can do it. What about this coming Monday, the 21st? Would that work for y'all?
Not for me, but
No,
I'm traveling all next week.
All next
the whole week. Yeah. But again, I can do what I can do.
I'm not available on Monday morning due to a previously scheduled appointment, but I could be available in the afternoon. And Tuesday looks open for me.
well, why don't we do this? This is not a regular meeting, so we don't have to necessarily discuss it in open session. It's one that I just call, but I'll call it based on your convenience. So if you want to get back to me later today or tomorrow, that's fine. I do want to do it quickly if we can. But I won't put you on the spot. Just let me know, and then we'll find the best time for the most people, and we'll call it. So we have no other business except a closed session. So we will go into closed session, and when we come out, it'll just be for the limited purpose of adjournment. We do have, I'm told by staff, security matter to discuss, as well as development in some litigation. Can I get a motion to go into executive session, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Okay. Thank you all.
Aye.
So much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Thank
Jason.
you.
Thank you.